a lot of startups will make the mistake of, well, I'm selling to a group of individuals, or, I'm trying to solve a problem for like a large swath of people. It's really just one person in the company. And once you figure out that framework, then you can actually have steps that you can measure on. And once you actually have steps that you can measure on, and you can actually prove that this product helps them, accomplish a task or a set of tasks, faster, more cost effective, more accurately, then that's when you have kind of like an early stage glimpse of product market fit.
Pete Ryan is the founder of Hi5, a B2B platform that connects companies with vetted connectors as a go-to-market engine. Before this, he ran enterprise sales at Atlassian and led SMB sales at LinkedIn. Today, we are talking about what you have to unlearn when you go from selling for big companies to building your own GTM motion, specifically how the partnership and connector playbook that looks clean on paper might hit friction at scale, and what changes when you're 5 years in. This is Are You Getting More? Pete, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So you went from LinkedIn to Atlassian right as they were acquiring Trello, and then you moved into the enterprise advocate role. So that's an unusual sales leadership trajectory. What were you seeing in those transitions that made you think this is the move rather than staying on a more conventional path?
If you look at my background, right, like it's kind of been a mix of, individual contributor sales roles to sales management roles to founding, to both have their pros and cons, right? Like, managing a team, obviously you're kind of further away from the customer than being a rep. Managing a company, you're actually really, really close to the customer, like more so than you'd ever think about being. And then as the team grows, right, you kind of are then further away from the customer. And so what's an interesting path I've always taken is like, the moments where I start to get really far away from the customer, I try to like reel it back and get closer to the customer. And so, yeah, that transition from being a, head of enterprise sales at Trello to Trello getting acquired and becoming like an IC sales rep, it was really just by virtue of me wanting to be closer to the customer, which, that's like really what excites me and fires me up every day.
Cool. Well, you spent time as head of enterprise sales at Atlassian and then started Hi5. When you were still in that enterprise role, what was the moment that made you think, I need to build something here rather than continue scaling someone else's GTM?
It's a mix of things, right? But like the most important thing for me is like when I see a problem, I just like feel like I need to fix it. And I'm really that way, just like even around my house. Like if there's something broken, I'm just like constantly fixing it. And it's kind of like very parallel to, founding a company, right? It's like I saw this problem, which is, go to market, existing channels, email, phone, LinkedIn have just become so saturated. And as a seller, right, I was always trying to figure out a different angle or a different way of doing things to overcome that problem. And that's really why I started Hi5.
Now at LinkedIn, you ran SMB sales for Sales Solutions and then went enterprise at Atlassian. So I know we keep talking about the path that you took and how it moved around. A lot of people might struggle with that kind of a transition because the motions are so different. So I'm curious, when you were moving from role to role along your journey, what's the biggest thing that you had to unlearn when you were going from like volume SMB to enterprise deals?
SMB is fun, right? Because just the deal velocity is so quick, right? So, you're closing like a 30K deal versus like a 300K deal. When I founded a company, right, most of the time, like you're starting at SMB. Not always the case, but, if you've raised a ton of funding and you can build all those enterprise features and go right into the enterprise, great. Most startups, that's not the path. And so, LinkedIn, right, it was selling like SMB was anything less than 1,000 employees, which like, there's still some big companies in there. So every company kind of has a different threshold for SMB versus mid-market versus enterprise. And so, I think like the big difference I see between selling into SMB and enterprise is just like a few things. Like one is, with enterprise, you're really leaning into value selling. And you're kind of really understanding, okay, like who are all the players involved in the decision, at like a 500, person company, right? Or even, 1,000-person company, just the amount of buyers in the buying cycle, right? Might be, I don't know, 5 or 6. In an enterprise, right? If you're selling into like, let's just say an Oracle, There's so many different departments. So, everyone has a different piece of making a decision. And obviously Oracle also has all these, acquisitions, right, that they've had. And so if you're speaking with one of those acquiring companies and trying to move into, selling to Oracle's main, procurement team, kind of threading the needle to see, okay, like who are really the real decision makers involved in the deal? Yeah. What matters to which teams? You're kind of just wearing different hats for different things. Once you go enterprise and you're then selling into an SMB, you kind of have to unlearn some of the things that, like, not unlearn, but just like you have to shelve some of the aspects of the sales process when you're talking to SMB, right? Because you might like inadvertently lengthen the sales cycle when, it's completely not necessary.
High Five is about connecting companies with vetted connectors as a GTM engine. That's a marketplace model solving a sales problem. What's the mistake you see founders make when they're trying to build partnerships or connect to networks as a growth channel?
When we first started High Five, right, we thought, okay, if we just build this platform that allows for people to essentially build their own LinkedIn, invite their advisors, investors, customers, partners, all into one place, right? And then we expose the networks of those people, then, sellers can go in and like request intros through those people, and it just, everything's going to work, right? A few key learnings that we've kind of run into is that if you're a seller requesting an intro through like an investor or, someone that's like higher level, there's just like this big spoon, little spoon type of scenario where like the 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 connector doesn't necessarily want to like introduce a lower level salesperson to their like other contact. What we found is actually, instead of having sellers request the intros, we now assign that role to one person in the company, and it's typically someone that has like a VP or C-level title within the company, because there's kind of this level playing field. So it's like the CEO of the company or the CRO is requesting an intro through an investor to like meet another CRO or CEO. And obviously, that'll still trickle down to the seller, but the CRO or CEO will like loop the seller into the conversation. But that's one learning, right? And so the other learning is that there needs to be a win-win for intros, right? I think if you get like a sales intro, it's much different than like a recruiting intro or just a networking intro, in the sense that like a recruiting intro, right, there's kind of like a win-win-win for everyone involved. So for instance, if I'm actively looking for a role and I requested an intro to someone and I end up getting that role, like everyone's just kind of happy. Like with sales, there's a different dynamic there where it's like there needs to be a win for the connector, right? Like once the deal closes, what's next? And so that's why we've actually introduced like payments into our platform. So for instance, if, someone requests an intro that lands in a meeting, right? You're paying a certain dollar amount for that meeting, right? If the deal ends up closing, there's a rev share, right? That would go back to the connector. And so those are all things that work. And obviously, not every intro is treated that way, right? So, you might have an intro that, where an investor's making the intro for, a company that they've invested in. Obviously, the investor doesn't want to make money off of that intro. It's just like, doesn't make sense. But, a partner does, an advisor does. And, there's a large cohort of people that do. And so the other thing is like another learning we had was, let's just say you're a smaller company, right? And, just an SMB, and you haven't yet fully built out that network of connectors, right? So you don't have all those customers or partners, investors, advisors. You can actually we tap into our network of connectors. And actually how we built that network is, as more and more people were signing up, we were just kind of reaching out to them and saying, hey, would you want to do this for other companies? And, once they raise their hand, they're kind of in our pool of connectors. And so really we are, a marketplace at heart, but it's kind of like a network marketplace, right? In a way, because you can build your own network, but also tap into network.
You had a previous startup, GoGoHire, before High Five. What did you learn from that experience that fundamentally changed how you're building the GTM motion this time around?
I was one of the first customers of Outreach, right? And so Outreach is basically this platform that allows for sellers to, really the core of it, right, is like sequencing emails. And so, what I would do at the early days with GoGoHire was like download a bunch of contacts from Zoom Info, plop it in Outreach, and push go. And that worked exceptionally well, right? Like I would get responses from people being like, "Oh my gosh, you're like one of the most like persistent people I've ever met in my life. You've reached out to me like 6 times over the last week." Now it's like the cat's out of the bag, right? It's like, oh, I've heard from this person 6 times. It's very unlikely that they're emailing me on like 6 different occasions. And so that's a primary source of us like driving business, right? And that worked exceptionally well. And just to take a step back too, like what GoGoHire was basically a marketplace for hiring salespeople. So as you can see, I've like kind of fallen into these like marketplace ideas. Basically how it would work on LinkedIn, you can find all the best passive candidates, but on job boards, right, you can find the active candidates, but then those aren't always like the best candidates. And so what we would do is figure out, okay, who are all the best salespeople on the planet in tech? And then we would get them to sign up for GoGoHire. And then basically like whether they're passive or active, companies could go in and, request to interview them. And so, and with the interview, right, they would basically like include a salary, which is kind of unusual, right? Like normally salary is like discussed at the end. And so that person would say, oh yeah, like this salary is much higher than, much higher than what I'm making now. I'm going to take this meeting. And then, they would take the interview, right? And if they ended up getting hired, right, we would actually pay the candidate $1,000 cash, and we would also send them actually a painted mural of their LinkedIn photo, right? And it was interesting.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it was cool. And this is like back in the day when like offices were still a thing. So they would get the $1,000 cash
Back in the day.
and then they would get the mural, and like they would be way more excited about the mural, right? Like, and this is something that they would keep at their desk, and people would ask, oh, where'd you get that? And they'd say, oh, well, I was hired through GoGoHire. So it was a great kind of viral loop that we figured out. Back to the go-to-market piece of GoGoHire, a lot of it was email, right? Because that channel still worked. And then what's funny is like our main go-to-market channel at High5 is actually just intros, because we've built this amazing cohort of advisors, like 150 advisors that are all really well connected in the go-to-market world. And so, we're constantly just eating our own dog food, or I guess you say drinking your own champagne, whatever you want to say. Now these days.
Two completely different images.
Yeah. Just a little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit different.
Yeah. And even when deals are stuck, right, and we see that there's like a mutual connection, we'll have that mutual connection that's one of our connectors, right, or advisors at High5, like unstuck the deal. And so, it's a terrific way of going to market for sure.
What's one framework or approach that you developed that you still use when thinking about product market fit today at High5?
Atlassian, right? They had already like achieved product market fit in a massive way, right? And so, but at the same time, they were constantly like launching new products. Because I was at Trello within Atlassian, I was still like within a startup within Atlassian, and so I had like a close relationship with this guy Justin Gallagher that was the head of product at Atlassian. What I would always ask him is, how do you think about product, right? Or like the features to build or what to build. And like one of the things that, innately picked up was he's a big fan of like job to be done theory, which is basically understanding like anytime someone pays money for a product, right? Like what is the exact job that they're trying to accomplish with that product, right? And can they solve that job in a faster, more accurate, and more cost-effective way? And that's essentially, what job to be done is. And so like what we brought to High5 was that framework. And so we actually use this product called Thrive. It's like thrv.com. And what it allows you to do is figure out, okay, like what's the person within the company, right, that has this problem that they're solving. And then figure out, okay, like what are all the steps? Like what's their workflow to solve it? And from there, it's like, okay, can we build something to help them do that better, more accurate and at a lower cost? And if that's the case, right, then from there, it's like, okay, let's get that product in the hands of that person. And a lot of startups will make the mistake of, oh, well, I'm selling to, a group of individuals, or, I'm trying to solve a problem for like a large swath of people. It's really just one person in the company. And once you figure out that framework, then you can actually have steps that you can measure on. And once you actually have steps that you can measure on, and you can actually prove that this product helps them, accomplish a task or a set of tasks, faster, more cost effective, more accurately, then, that's when you have kind of like an early stage glimpse of product market fit. Once you have that, that one customer, then it's like, okay, let's go to another person that has that same title, that has that same problem. And, there's also like, a lot of problems too that seem like great problems to solve on the surface. But then, when you actually like try to solve them for one specific user, you kind of run into this blocker, which is, either the problem isn't great enough, right? Enough for them to pay money for it, or you realize like, well, the technology that's available like can't actually solve that problem, right? What you want to avoid is actually running, and we actually kind of ran into this with GoGoHire in a way where we were going after staffing revenues, but with tech margins, which, are kind of contradictory to each other, because staffing is like inherently a very human based thing. And we were like, oh, well, we'll add technology to it. And like, okay, adding technology to it, actually to try to solve that problem that's so relationship driven, and like it's such an important thing, like someone finding a job, you kind of hit a ceiling, right? And then you realize, okay, we're hitting a ceiling here, but then in order to scale, we actually need to hire more people. A lot of times you're not going to discover that until you build the product. These days with AI, you can build products so quickly to where, you can ship things, get them in hands of customers, learn, iterate, and just like have this amazing learning loop. Big thing I've learned, kind of to bring it all back is, at Atlassian, right, kind of talking to Justin and, deeply understanding, the job to be done theory, kind of by happenstance running into Thrive, right? Thrive.com to help me organize that. And then, from there, it's like, okay, let's ship product, get it in the hands of customers, and see if we can actually have a measurable outcome for customers that you can then go and try to replicate with other customers.
Excellent answer. Excellent.
Yeah.
Very detailed. Very detailed. Another founder who was building a connector or partnership-driven GTM model might struggle with the cold start problem. How do you get, like the chicken and egg, how do you get both sides engaged? So what has worked for you at High5 that you would tell another founder to try first? You do it.
Thinking about a marketplace, like you have supply and demand. And so really what you have to figure out is like, what side of the marketplace can you fake initially, right? Because, going after both initially is just going to be like way too difficult. And that's the thing that's tricky about marketplaces in general, right? Is you're basically having to build two different products for two different users, and hope that like those two products, work to connect the users to exactly take off at the same time. And so for us, we actually initially scraped all of the connectors that we would want to have on High5. And so we just like scraped them off LinkedIn, built, profiles of them, actually scraped to figure out, okay, like where their connections lie, right? So we'd like, with LinkedIn, it's kind of restricted. We could only like pull 1,000 connections per connector. But then like once the intros started happening, we would then go and get these like connectors onto our marketplace essentially. It's like, okay, this one person constantly gets hit up for intro requests. Like we need to get them on as soon as possible. And like how we were able to do that is, hey, this is a way for you to make supplemental income, which like, these days, like everyone's looking for. And really it's like very low effort for you to go ahead and like make these intros, and you're going to get paid per intro. You're going to make money on the rev share. So we made it really compelling for them to sign up. And we did kind of a similar thing with GoGoHire, right? Where we kind of found the best sellers on LinkedIn or people that have vouched for those sellers and scrape their profiles, put them on the network. And then, but you can only do that for so long, right? For us with High5, what's been interesting is like, you can have one connector and they can be working with like 5 different companies. And as long as they're engaged, then it's great, right? Because like an intro is like a pretty low lift, right? For them to make it. And they can do it kind of 24/7, 365, or maybe not 24/7, but they still have to sleep. But Whereas with GoGo Hire, it was a little trickier, right? Because, on average, people are looking for new jobs, every 18 months. And
Mhm.
so ultimately, like where we made money was on the throughput, right? The throughput of someone landing and getting a job. That certainly like deemed to be challenging, right? Because you needed to constantly be like refilling the pipeline of candidates. And obviously that's, it's really costly, right? To have to do that because you're having to spend a lot on marketing and then obviously betting and so on and so forth. And I guess OpenAI is going into going into this space, right? Which is, they're essentially going to be building like so I've heard, right? Building a candidate marketplace,
Mhm.
and helping, candidates and companies, get matched through AI. So yeah, that'll be, I think like, maybe with GoGo Hire, we were just like a little bit early. And now with AI, right, it's going to be a game changer because it's, what is a resume? It's all natural language. What is a
Mhm.
job posting? It's all natural language. And, obviously OpenAI has like more info on anyone. Yeah, I probably put more info personally about myself into OpenAI, like through ChatGPT than like really any other product, right? So they've got a
Yeah.
huge advantage there.
Yeah.
So
Google has static info that's available and from public sources, but like we all share our souls with these things as we're trying to
Yes.
get good context for it to give us relevant answers. So I think contextually, the information that OpenAI has is way more valuable than what Google has.
without a doubt. Yeah. Which is a
Yes.
little scary, but exciting at the same time.
It's all scary, man. But like at this point, there's nothing we can do about it. Like we've all been sold
Skynet,
down the
man.
river.
Skynet.
It doesn't
It's
matter.
coming.
We can go live in the woods and they'll still find us.
Yeah. Oh,
There's no
exactly.
escape.
Yeah. No escape. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you've been building High Five for almost 5 years now, which means that you've likely rebuilt, rethought, and restitched the GTM motion multiple times. What's the one thing that you were confident about in year one that you've completely reversed your position on today?
Initially, we actually built a product that would allow for companies to sync CRMs. So like you've got
Mm.
company A and company B. And so like they basically would connect their Salesforce instance. We would sync their CRMs to figure out, okay, these two companies are not competitive. And they're going after the same market. So they should be partners. We
Hmm.
should sync their CRM to figure out like where company A has prospects, where company B has customers, and where company B has prospects, where company A has customers. And then from there, like having a way to request intros. Yeah, like what we were confident it was like, okay, go to market's really challenging and like intros are the path, right? What we realized from that was like every time we would go to a company and present them with this type of solution, they would always push us to their partner team. So so like the data was super rich, right? Because like instantly
Mhm.
you'd be able to figure out like who has relationships, like real relationships, right, with customers. What makes it really difficult is like if I'm a seller at company A and I'm trying to get an intro through company B seller, that has to go through like a few people, right? Typically I would go to my head of partnerships. That head of partnerships would reach out to, company B's head of partnerships, and then they would, ask the seller for an intro. And most of the time, like sellers are always thinking like, well, what's in it for me, right? Obviously, like some companies will offer spiffs or, rev share, those types of things for making intros to their customer base. Really, it just became like a more complex problem where it wasn't like me just asking one person for an intro. It's like I had to go through this whole string of command. You typically have to have a call just about like one intro, right? The more relationships become that much more valuable. We're really betting on that, right? And so I think like really within the next 12 months or so, there's going to be a winner in this category. Like, and it won't yet fully be announced, right? That's the winner in the category, but there will be a winner in the category. And it's kind of like one of those things that just, it needs to happen, right? It like solving this problem needs to happen. Eventually it's just going to become, so noisy to where the only thing that works is like relationships, right? And so,
Hmm.
or at least that's the bet we're making around High Five.
Sure. It's the way that you started it is really interesting, and it's always nice to see how, like in hindsight, Like, you look at what you started with and you're like, well, now I understand why that didn't work. But at the time it was like, this is gonna work.
Yeah.
And it's good that you don't get stuck in that, trying to continue to crowbar that thing into success. At some point you're smart enough to be like, all right, we need to evolve this. And what you have today isn't going to be the same thing that you're doing, at some point in the future.
Well, that's the thing. Sometimes the universe changes around you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
That's right.
looking across everything from LinkedIn SMB to Atlassian Enterprise and now to building High Five, what's the one principle about go-to-market that you keep coming back to, regardless of context or stage?
I think really it comes back to relationships, right? Like there's like a couple like schools of thought, right? There's some sales leaders that are like, yeah, I need to hire sellers that have a ton of relationships because they're gonna drive more business faster. And then there's other people that are like, oh, well, we don't need them to have a lot of relationships. We just need them to be like really good sellers. I think there's somewhere in the middle there that helps, or at least like sellers that are able to thread the needle of saying, okay, like I'm trying to reach the chief information security officer at GE. Like, how am I going to reach that person through email, in-mail, or cold calling? You're not, right? And so, like figuring out, okay, like who knows this person, who knows them like kind of well, really well. And then from there, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to have conversations with these people around that around the sphere of that person. And then I'm going to eventually get to that CISO. These days, it's just become such a necessary way of going to market, right? That like, there's really no other way. And so I think like early days at LinkedIn, we were doing a lot of that, right? Because we were just starting up the LinkedIn Sales Solutions division, and we were, closing some deals, and we were kind of asking like, oh, well, I see that you're connected with this other person. Would you mind making an intro? Or, hey, we're in the sales cycle with this person. It looks like you're connected with them. Would you mind putting in a good word, right? Because it seems like you guys have gotten a lot of value out of LinkedIn Sales Solutions. So it's like from LinkedIn to DoubleDutch to GoGoHire to to Atlassian. Like I've kind of been doing this all along. And obviously I was doing cold outbound and using outreach early, all those things, but you kind of got to do it all, but with a heavy emphasis on relationship selling, relationship led growth, go to network, whatever you want to call it. You kind of got to be doing that and investing in that. And I think doing it early too. Like any founder I chat with, I'm always like, well, do you have an advisory board? And they're like, oh, no, not yet. It's like, well, start building it today, right? Carve 2 or 3% of your company out just to be building an advisory board of people that know your customers, right? Is that just going to, increase your the velocity in which you are able to go to market really in a much cheaper way versus, investing a ton in marketing or investing a ton in sales. Let the people and trust help, drive revenue for you, right? And you have to do it in a thoughtful way too, and kind of how you go about it. And you also have to remember that like you can't just keep on going back to the well like over and over and over with a connector. Like,
Right.
like relationships are super valuable. You want to be very methodical about how you're asking for the intro, when you're asking for it, kind of providing yourself a little bit of a cool down period before you ask for another intro.
Wonderful. Well, Pete, thank you so much for being on the show. We appreciate the time.
Likewise. Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, Lisa.
If any of you watching or listening want to connect with Pete and see what they're doing at High Five, we'll put a link in the video description. Thank you so much for listening. This has been Are You Getting More? And we'll see you next time.